Why do people have the preferences they have in the first place? Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving headfirst into this massive, fundamental mystery about human behavior. We literally make thousands of choices every single day, right? From what we grab for breakfast to how we invest our life savings. But where do the actual desires driving those choices come from? Well, today, we're unpacking a fascinating new model that attempts to trace the very origins of our preferences.
It's a seriously profound question when you stop and chew on it for a second. Think about your own life. Why is it that one person, maybe even you, can look at a situation and immediately see opportunity, while someone else looks at that exact same scenario and just sees a massive wall of risk? Why does one kid grow up full of confidence while another is paralyzed by fear? Or why do some families and communities just seem to effortlessly compound their capabilities over generations, while others constantly struggle to keep their heads above water?
Okay, let's dive into this. For a long time, traditional economics has basically relied on a concept called standard utility to explain all of this human behavior. At its absolute most basic level, utility is just a mathematical way of representing a preference. So if you prefer option A over option B, economists just say, well, option A provides greater utility. Leave it to economists to take all our messy, wonderfully complex human desires and boil them down to a neat little math equation, right? But here's an absolutely crucial point. Utility isn't necessarily about happiness or pleasure or even making the most money. It is simply a mathematical tool used to describe the choice you made.
And to be fair, we really have to acknowledge just how massively successful this idea has been. This isn't just some dusty academic theory. Standard utility literally sits at the foundation of modern economics. We're talking consumer choice theory, game theory, the whole shebang. It models human decision-making practically everywhere. Because by taking all of our wild, unpredictable human preferences and compressing them into a single, comparable value, economists get this incredibly powerful lens for analyzing behavior.
But there's a catch. There's a real limit to what utility can actually tell us. You see, it perfectly describes the choice being made right now. It's like taking a static snapshot of a decision at the exact moment it happens. But it completely misses the deeper, often multi-generational origin story behind the capability to make that choice. It tells us what you prefer today, sure, but not how you actually became the kind of person capable of making that choice. Or, for that matter, why those specific options were even on the table for you in the first place.
And that realization is exactly the motivation for a completely new perspective. It's the idea that capability formation over time actually matters just as much as your final preference. Just think about how tangled and interconnected our lives are. Childhood development, the education system, social mobility, technology, the quality of institutions and trust, these are not just random, isolated events that pop up right before you make a decision. No, they're part of this continuous, compounding snowball process that either builds up or erodes our capabilities over our entire lifetime.
So, to really get to the bottom of this deeper process, we're introducing the Productive Value Productive Power Framework, or PVPP for short. This is a much broader, much more dynamic model. Instead of just zooming in on the final choice you make, the PVPP framework zooms out. It explores how our capabilities, our opportunities, and even our perceived realities are actually forged through a long chain of interactions throughout our lives.
The framework kicks off with two core concepts. First up, we have productive value, or PV. The definition here is basically anything transferred through an interaction that affects future outcomes. Now, obviously, money is productive value, goods and services are too, but, and this is key, things like information, mentoring, trust, protection, and opportunity, those are also productive value. It's whatever moves between people when they interact. So if a friend sits down and gives you some really solid life advice, they are transferring positive, productive value straight to you.
Following up immediately on that, we have the second concept, productive power, or PP. Productive power is essentially the accumulated capability that results from all those transfers. It is your ability to create, receive, preserve, apply, protect, and recover productive value in the future. So, your accumulated knowledge, that's productive power. Your skills, productive power. Even your physical health and your savings account, yep, that's productive power too. Basically, every single interaction you have transfers productive value, which then permanently alters your productive power.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how we can contrast these two views using a real-world scenario we can probably all relate to, navigating a career versus parenting. Imagine a parent trying to decide whether to take a huge, demanding promotion that requires a ton of travel.
The standard utility view models this by basically weighing the extra income and career advancement against the increased stress and lost family time to spit out a preference ranking. But the PVP view, it looks at this entirely differently. It evaluates how this choice alters future capability, mentoring, and the long-term compounding effects for absolutely everyone involved in that family system.
And that brings us right to the core PVPP question. How does each choice change the future productive power of everyone involved? Looking back at our promotion example, sure, taking the job might massively increase the parent's income, their professional network, and future opportunities. But simultaneously, it might severely reduce the amount of one-on-one attention, emotional support, and developmental guidance that gets transferred to their kids. So the question is no longer just, which option do you prefer? Instead, it's, how does this decision fundamentally alter the future capabilities of both the parent and the child?
Let's look at another massive area of life, education. Traditional economics usually treats going to school primarily as an investment. You know the drill. You pay tuition now to get a wage premium later on. It just increases future earnings. But the PVP view treats education as a foundational system for productive power formation and interaction corridor access. Things like reading, writing, discipline, learning how to navigate institutions, those are all critical forms of productive power. A good school doesn't just transfer raw facts into your brain, it builds your future capability and literally opens doors to entirely new networks and pathways.
And the wild thing is how these transfers compound over the course of our entire lives. Think about it. A child raised in a highly stable environment receives thousands of productive value transfers. Things like constant language exposure, good nutrition, physical safety, and steady guidance, all during their most formative years. That builds intense early productive power, which then shapes their adolescent corridors, like the peer groups they join and the expectations placed on them, which in turn heavily dictates their adult skills and opportunities. So by the time two adults are standing side by side making what looks like a simple choice, much of the difference between them was actually baked in by decades of prior capability formation.
So the crucial point here is, you might be thinking this completely throws traditional economics out the window, but it absolutely doesn't. The PVPP framework does not reject standard utility. It is not saying utility's wrong. In fact, one of the coolest takeaways here is that utility-like behavior actually emerges completely naturally from this richer structure. When life circumstances are simple and routine enough, a person's choices can absolutely be mapped using those familiar utility models from Econ 101. PVPP just acts as a much larger, encompassing structural framework.
And this brilliantly illustrates the relationship if we use a quick metaphor from physics. Standard utility is very much like Newtonian physics. It is extraordinarily useful in simple everyday conditions. I mean, we didn't just throw out Newton's equations the second Einstein came along. But the PVP framework, that is like general relativity. It's a much broader framework that describes the deeper underlying mechanics of our capabilities and interactions. And it becomes absolutely essential when you're looking at high-pressure conditions, deep inequalities, or long time frames that the standard model simply was never built to handle.
I want to wrap up this explainer by leaving you with this exact thought-provoking quote from the source material because it perfectly summarizes this entire paradigm shift. If utility helps explain the choices people make, the productive value, productive power framework attempts to explain how people become the kinds of individuals who make those choices in the first place. So I'll leave you to ponder this. How have the countless interactions in your own past shaped the very preferences you hold today? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and we will see you next time.